Hi and welcome to this CG Jam tutorial. In this lesson we're going to be ripping off that legendary guru of the compositing world, Andrew Kramer from Video Copilot, and he recently put up a video in learning how to do a solar atmospheric tutorial, so we're going to see if we can translate that into Blender. We'll just take a look at that quickly and show you what it's about. As you can see, we have this really nice flaming solar sun atmospheric effect, and it's all done using procedural textures within After Effects, and he's managed to get some really quite spectacular results. So with that in mind, let's head back over to Blender and see if we can translate that into something we can all use ourselves. So how he does it is he takes a cloud's texture, adjusts the settings to make it all energetic and fiery, and then he maps that texture to a sphere and then colorizes it and does some interesting tricks to animate it. And we can't do that exactly the same way in Blender because we don't have the same tools, obviously, but we can do it similar and get a result that's fairly close to the After Effects, I think. But the first thing we need to do is get rid of the cube, because we don't need to map to a plane, we can automatically generate the sphere from the very start, so we'll do that first. So just hit X and delete the cube, then press Shift A and add a sphere. Go over to our toolbar, properties, and click smooth shading. There we go, that's looking lovely. Press Ctrl 2 and that adds a subdivision surface. Give me 1 minute, I'll just turn on my screencast keys so you can see what we're doing. Okay, cool, now we can see what's happening. Now if we just want to set up our scene, so let's press 1 and go into front view, and then Control, Alt and 0 on the number pad to lock our camera to our view, and then we need to just adjust everything, so we're going to open up our toolbar by pressing N and click the lock camera to view button and just zoom in so our camera is following where we go, and I'm just moving the camera up to bring the sphere somewhat into the center of our camera view. That's it, lovely. And then we can uncheck lock camera to view so our camera doesn't move anymore if we move around. I'm just slightly adjusting the screencast keys there because they're a bit big and getting in the way. Okay, that looks fine. Alright, so the next thing we need to do is to create the layers that we're going to use, and we do that by pressing Shift D on the cube, and we do that 3 times, so Shift D, Shift D, Shift D, and we should now have a total of 4 spheres, and we want to move each one to an individual layer. So select the sphere, press M, and just move it onto the next layer like so. Now we should have 4 spheres on 1 sphere on 4 layers, as you can see in the layer section on the toolbar. Brilliant. Now we can get in and start looking at the textures. So the first thing I need to do is just jump into the Object Data panel and rename the sphere, and I'm going to call this first one, I'm going to rename it as Base, and now I'm going to open up a new texture, a new material, and I'm going to call this one also Base. And I don't need a material on this first layer. We'll jump into our second layer, and we're going to call this one surface. Open up a new material, and this is going to be our fiery energy base layer. So with a new material set up, I'm going to rename it also to surface, keeping things consistent with our naming. And I'm going to take the specularity right down to 0 because we don't want it reflecting anything. And now the shading, I'm going to change the emit value, and I'm going to make that 0.7, and that just illuminates it, so we don't need any scene lights. It creates its own light. Push it up to 0.8. Yeah, that's okay. Now let's jump into the materials. Yeah, just one second. I'm just looking at my first layer, and I need to take the specularity from that as well, which I forgot to do. So I'm just going to move that down. So now we have a blank thing, and I'm going to change the shading. I'm just going to push that up to 0.7 as well, or 1. 1's better, I think, for the base layer. Yeah, we don't need a material for this one, like I say, so let's jump back to layer 2, where we're doing our surface layer. Make sure it's selected, and we can go in. Just drop the emit value down to 0.7. And now we can start on our actual textures. Now for this one, I'm going to change the default clouds material, and I'm going to choose distorted noise, and you can see we've got this weird liquidy squirrely looking surface material which looks really nice. And under the distorted noise settings, I'm going to just adjust the size and bring it down 1 point. Yep, that looks okay. And the noise distortion method, I'm going to choose improved purling, and the basis for the noise I'm going to switch to Voronoi F3, and you can see we get this really liquidy, fiery looking texture. Now under the colours, I'm going to hit ramp, and I'm going to excuse me, I'm going to just go and turn the alpha all the way to black, and then drag the black slider up a bit to bring in some contrast, and that will give us some dark spots on our surface. That looks okay, I think. Just switch to both views. You can see we've got these nice black patches that are going to allow our surface base layer to show through. Okay, let's see, do we need anything else on this one? Of course we do. I'm just going to close down the windows we don't need. Now, in order to get it to move, we need to adjust the offset, and if you look at the preview, as we move the offset values, move it on the Z, you can see the material scrolls up. If we move it along the Y, it kind of goes diagonally weird. But the one we want to look at is the X value, because we want it to rotate around the equator. So we'll just reset the Y and Z values, which were just as examples. And yeah, we want the material to go around the equator, so let's get in, and on the first frame of our clip, frame 1, we're going to press a keyframe just by pressing I over the offset value, and that turns it yellow, which indicates there's a keyframe in there. And on our timeline, we're going to jump to the very end, and we need to just simply type in a value, and I'm going to type in 0.3. I think that will be enough, because we don't want it scrolling by too fast. And now if we just scrub through gently, if I drag the value, you can see it's moving in the opposite direction to what we want. So in order to fix that, I'm going to hover over the offset value and just find the right direction. Just hover over the value, and on the top keyboard numbers where the little minus sign is, I'm just going to tap the minus sign and turn that into a negative value. Now this doesn't work with the negative on the keypad, just to let you know, it's only on the top row of numbers. Okay, if we look under the influence, we don't need any of them, so we'll turn that down. And now we need to get the distortion to move and distort nicely, so we're going to keyframe the distortion value. So if we jump to the first frame, and the distortion value of 1 to start with is fine, so we'll just press I and drop in a keyframe there. Jump to the very end, and we'll increase that distortion value to 1.8. We'll see how that goes to start with. Okay, that's good. And that is our first layer done and dealt with. But we need to go to our graph editor, and these little handles are all Bezier curves, and what that's going to do is cause our animation to start slowly and then speed up and then slow down to stop, because it's set automatically to ease in. So if I press T on the keyboard and change the handles from Bezier to linear, that will make the curves straight between the keyframes, and they'll make our animation a constant speed at all times. Okay, that's lovely. So let's move on, and we can get into our next layer. So I'll turn that back to a timeline, and we'll move to layer 3. And we're going to do exactly the same thing almost. So jump over to the image data, rename it to atmosphere and create a new material. Reduce the intensity and adjust the shading emit value, and create a new material, change the name to atmosphere, and we're going to do the same with the texture. Adjust the ramp, turn the alpha all the way up, move the sliders in a bit to create a little bit of contrast, and then with the size we're going to adjust that and make it slightly bigger, about 0.45. and now the important part is to let's change that to 0.5. Yeah. Now the important part is the depth of the clouds, and we're going to take that all the way up by holding down the slider and dragging, and we'll take that up as far as it will go. 24 anymore? No, 24 is the maximum, and that just gives us some depth in the actual size of the within the clouds themselves. Okay. Now just adjust the contrast a little bit more. That's okay. Right, so let's move on, and now we want to adjust the offset to create that movement, and we're going to start off with a slightly different value just to make it a bit different from the original, from the first layer. So we'll change that to 0.3 and put in a keyframe by pressing I. Jump to the last frame, and we want it to reduce in size, so I'm going to change it to a negative value. Oops. I'm going to make it negative 0.8, and that'll make it slightly faster than the first layer. Okay, and that's all we need to do for that layer. So let's jump over into our final layer now, and select it and create a new material, and this one, drop down the specular, and we're going to make it shadeless, and that negates the specular and diffuse. We just get the diffuse colour, and oops, let's just rename it quickly, make sure we know what layer we're working with, and we're going to call this one speckles, because this is just going to create the speckly noise kind of thing that goes on. You'll see what that's about in a minute. I'll change the material, call that speckles as well, and for this one we're going to leave it as clouds, but we're going to come down to the basis and switch it from Blender Original, and we're going to use an improved Perlin. Now we want this to be really tiny, so let's set up our colour ramp first, get a bit of contrast, and we're going to drag this down as small as we can get it. And you can see it's a bit too noisy, so we're going to drag the contrast right up, and that looks okay. Might be a bit too big, so I'm going to have a look first at the depth. Let's crank that up. Not quite as much as the previous one, we'll make it 15, and then we'll change the offset again. Do it exactly the same way, go to the start, and we'll have the start point of 2, press I to insert the keyframe, jump to the end frame, and we'll change the end frame from 2 to let's see, 1.45, that seems reasonable. Of course we're going backwards, we want it to be a lower number. Press I to insert the keyframe, and now I'm not entirely convinced by the size of these speckles. They look like they might be a bit too big, so I'm going to go and just render this frame one time, and well, they look a little bit big, but I think we can get away with that. We'll see how it goes, we can always adjust it later. So let's head back to our 3D view. Okay, so first thing we need to do is set up the layers for each of our spheres, and we do that in the render layers section, and we just click the little plus button, and that adds a layer for each each layer. We just rename them by double clicking on the name. We just call them the same as we called the spheres: base layer, surface, atmosphere, and finally speckles. Yeah, there we go, speckles. And under our layers tab we need to make sure all our layers are set up, so press shift and click each of the layers with a sphere on them, and then under the layers panel for each layer we'll just select the single layer that the sphere is on, making sure that you've got the right layer for the right name, otherwise you might get confused later on, but okay, we're good to go. 50% on our render size is good for test rendering, that's fine. And our output file, I'm going to create a new file. Oops, sorry, wrong button. I want to create a new directory, and I'm going to just call this some tutorial. There we go. Accept. Oh, it hasn't done it. Let's open it up, select the file. Now we click accept and it's there in our output folder there. So we're all good to go now. So all that's required is we click the render button, and that will set us going. Ooh, I don't like those squares. That's caused by the sun lamp, scene lamp in our thing, I think. Not to worry. We'll fix that later. We'll see if we can get away with it. So open up our node editor and click on the compositing nodes section. Click on use nodes. Click on backdrop. And we're all set up to start adding some colour to this beast. So click Shift D to duplicate the render layers. And you'll notice we've lost our screencast because it doesn't currently work in the compositor. And I've just pressed Ctrl and up arrow to make it full screen so we can see what we're doing. And now I'm going to adjust each of the render layers to the different layers just by clicking the little menu and selecting the relevant layer. Right, so that's done, we're all set up. Now in order to create the colour on our layers, we need to multiply the whites and the blacks by a colour, and we do that with a colour mix node, so we drop that in onto our timeline. Now if we hold that down and press Ctrl, Shift and left click, that immediately drops a viewer node into our string, and you can see we have immediately just got a fully white screen, which is no good. So we need to change the white to a nice orangey colour. Although having said that, we have made a bit of a mistake because we haven't actually done the background, and because it's partially grey, that's going to affect the background colour. We need it to be fully black in order to multiply against the colours. So let's head back to our world settings, take the horizon colour and drop it right down to black, like so. And then we can go back to our screen, just press Ctrl up arrow and click the little render tab, or open up the render menu, select render, and it should just quickly run through. There we go. And now we can go back to our node editor. Now we have a fully black background. We can multiply our whites and our blacks with the colour, and there you can see immediately we're still getting that artifacting that I was worried about earlier. So we need to head back over to the materials tab and with our base layer selected, we need to just click shadeless, and that'll solve that artifacting that we were dealing with. So now we can go back to our node editor. We'll render it out. There we go. No more artifacts. So head back to our node editor and we can carry on. Okay. So we've got our base layer. We're going to duplicate the mix node, or multiply node as it is now, and we're going to connect. We've forgotten to put all our scenes back on, so let's put all our layers back together. Re-render that, go back to our node editor, and we can now connect our atmosphere layer. Press Ctrl and Shift, and we can see that's a bit dark and grotty looking. I don't like that at all. So let's change the colour of that by clicking the little colour icon and moving the colour wheel, and we'll bring it more into the yellow and increase the brightness value. That's looking a bit better. Try and move it up a bit more, a bit too pale. And this really is all about tweaking, just finding a look that you like. Now once we've got our base colour, we're going to add a colour balance node. If we can drop it onto the string, there we go. Now we're going to take down the darker parts of the image, reduce the value and move the little colour wheel into the more browny regions, and we're going to take the gain and push that right up, so now you can start to see the brightness is happening. It's starting to look a lot more fiery. I'm going to push the gamma up a little bit, and I'm adjusting the base colour, make it a little bit less dark. Now you can start to see that it's looking a lot more fiery and hot. Yeah, I think I'm happy with that one. So let's move on to the next layer. Press Shift, select those two nodes, Shift D to duplicate them, and then we can, oops, I've clicked it into the wrong one. I just need to make sure that the layer goes into the top value. And now I'm going to reduce the overall colour into the ready areas, and now I just need to adjust the colour balance node to bring us some nice clouds. A little bit more on the old gain there, not the gain, the shadowy bits. Lift. going to adjust the gain into some of the yellows. So yeah, that's looking hot. I'm liking the look of that overall. Okay, so let's do the final layer. Exactly the same. Duplicate the multiply and the color balance connecting to the image, and let's start tweaking these colors. Bring them into the more yellows, push the values right to the brightest look of it, and yeah, I'm going to go back to the 3D view. I'm not liking the look at all of the size of those colors, so let's go back to our materials, and we're going to just reduce the size by lots. Not that much. Let's make it 0.001, I think. 0.05, and make sure everything's selected again. Jump back into rendering. That's it, and go back to our node editor. And there we go, that's a lot better. We've got more speckly sizes, and we can start adjusting the lift and the gain. Now you see, if we put too much of the lift in, it starts affecting the background, and we don't want it to do that, even though I quite like the look of that. It's not helping, so let's drag it back into the black. I think that's not too bad. We're doing okay with that, I think. Just pull the gain up. Just endless tweaking. We could go on forever just tweaking numbers. And I think we're probably going to go on forever tweaking numbers, so let's stop this here. And we can move on to connecting all the separate layers together. So I'll just drag these viewer nodes out of the way, and if we press Ctrl A and add another mix node and drop that onto the top layer, and we drag our second layer together, and I'll just connect the viewers, and we want to change the mix type from mix to add, and you can see now our colours are a bit heavy, so I'm going to try multiplying. No, that's darkened it down too much. Okay, let's switch it back to add, and you can see our colours are all a bit heavy, but that will be fixed as we go through. Let's duplicate the mix node, the add node rather, and we'll plug it in to the top socket, and we'll plug our next layer underneath. This is our atmosphere layer, and that's pretty cool. You can see it's a little burnt out. Do it again, duplicate, connect the add node, and now connect the final layer. Connect it to the viewer, and there you can see all our sparkles. That's looking pretty fine, but I think I want the sparkles to go underneath a bit, so I'm going to swap some layers around and see what we come up with. Yeah, that's better, I think. We'll try one more swap. Take the sparkles layer and put it onto the base layer and put the atmosphere and the surface layers together. I think, yeah, that's looking a lot better. I'm liking that a lot. It doesn't look much different, but on my screen it does make a difference. I'm just going to go in now and tweak some of the settings now that everything is together. Reduce some of the colour balance wheels. See if we can get it looking more realistic and fiery, like a big ball of fiery gas. That's, yeah, we are rocking this boat. That's looking nice. So now what I want to do is put in some atmospheric haze along the edges of the sun, so that it kind of blends in and takes out some of that sharp edge. And we're going to do a few little tricks with this. Let's move some of these nodes out of the way so they're not completely distracting everything. And the first thing I'm going to do is add an input RGB, and that just gives us a colour wheel. And I'm going to put an input colour balance wheel, and I'm just going to set these together like so. And now I'm going to adjust these to get a nice yellow kind of orangey layer that's going to mask over our, well, it's not going to mask over, it's going to overlay our scene. It's not showing anything in the viewer because it doesn't have anything to show, it's just a colour. And we need to connect it into the right socket, and that's the wrong one. So, oh yeah, we need to connect it to the actual layers, not input it into a factor. That would be silly. Okay, so add a colour mix node and drop that onto there, and connect the layers into the sockets. So now we can see we have all the colours, and we switch it to an add type, and you can see we've got this big yellow nastiness, so we need to create a mask to cut it out. And we're going to use this render layer because it's the right shape, and we're going to do some compositing trickery to create the mask, because all we want is these edges to fade into the center and make it all weird without having any edge. So let's drag this a bit closer, and the first thing we're going to do is, after we've lined everything up, is we're going to put in a filter dilate erode. We'll drop that in and connect the render layer as a mask, and we can see we've just got the nice white mask. And if we start dropping down the dilate erode, you can see that mask is getting smaller. And now for the trickery part, we add a colour mix, drop that in, and we take the render layer once again and plug it into the bottom socket. And if we now change the mix type from mix to mix to subtract, it does it all wrong. I've got the layers on backwards, so if I just swap the layers around, you can see we've subtracted the smaller dilate from the original mask, and that's created a nice arc. And all we need to do is to drop in a filter blur node, if I can catch the wire. Drop on, there we go. Change it to fast Gaussian, and then we change the size of the blur by 10 pixels. That looks like it'll be good, and that's our mask. So now if we come to our layer node that we have for our horrible yellow thing, and we plug the mask into the factor, and we swap the render layers around properly, we can now see that our mask is cutting out all that yellow, and all we need to do is adjust the blending mode, find one that works, try overlay. No, it's a bit too burnt out. Try burn. That's not too bad, I don't think. Adjust the colour on our RGB input. And we'll change some of the settings on the colour balance for that. We're starting now to get something pretty nice. Excuse me. Okay, so let's make it a little bit special. We'll hit a glare node, drop that on the top, and we'll change it to a fog glow. And if we start dropping the threshold, let it composite. It's starting to get a little bit slow, it has to work things out. Not seeing anything, just keep dropping it down slightly. Five, 4. No, I'm not seeing anything. Increase the size. Ah, there we go, we got a bit then. You can see it's starting to give a bit of an atmosphere, which is exactly what we want. So let's try and duplicate this. Shift D. Let it composite. It's starting to take its time horrendously now because of all the extra stuff, and you can see we're starting to get that fiery heat haze glow around the corona. It's looking pretty good. So I think we can move on now, and all that's left for us to do for this little section is to connect everything up to the composite node. Just plug that in there, and we are ready to test render. So we just hit Alt F12, or we come up to this top menu here and choose animation, and we've set it running, and it's going to take a little while before I set it running. I'm just going to adjust the compression on this to about 40% because it's only a test render. And now we can set it running, and I'll see you in a moment. Alright, we're back and it's all rendered out nicely, and we're all ready to take a look at it. So I'm going to go back to my node viewer, just quickly, make sure everything's okay, and I'm going to go to my menu and press the play rendered animation button, and we'll take a look at what we've got. And it's running backwards. Or at least the top layer is running, the surface layer is running backwards. The clouds and the speckles are all going the right way. So somewhere along the line we made a little bit of a mistake, but that's why we do test renders. Okay, so we need to fix that. So let's jump over into our Materials tab, go to the 3D view, go to our layers, make sure we've got the right surface selected, and yep, that's the right one. Go to our textures, and we'll see where the problem is. The distortion looks okay. We don't need to, do we? Shall we mess with that? Yeah. Let's put it up to 2.3. Don't forget to press I to insert the keyframe. And that'll just give us more distortion throughout the thing. And here's the problem. When we set the X value to go to the negative value, we must have forgotten to put in the keyframe to lock that in place. So I'll do that again, press the negative button, and then this time I'll press the insert keyframe button, and I'll just check that. Yep, it's going bloody tooltips. You can turn those off, by the way, but we're not getting into that in this video. I'm going to increase it slightly, I think. No, I'm not. I'll leave it as it is, it's fine. But we are going to go into the graph editor, and we're going to make sure all our objects are selected, because one of the things we did last time was we set the linear keyframe mode on our graph, but we only did it for one layer. So I've now selected all my keyframes, not keyframes rather, all my layers. Press T to bring up the menu, L, press T to bring up the menu, and then I pressed chosen linear from the menu, and now we're all good to go. I'm going to reduce the resolution down to 30% because again it's only a test render and it's a second test render, so we're just double checking. We already know it's going to look nice. And I can just, I'm going to change the I'm going to make a new file for this render, so I'm not over rendering the previous files. Choose that folder, and there we go. Got a new directory, and we hit animation, and we're off again a second time. Okay, that's looking good. So I'll see you once this is all rendered out again. And welcome back once again. Third time lucky. Okay, so we've finished rendering everything. Let's take a look at our play rendered animation. And it's a little bit tiny, so let's full screen it. And yeah, now we're looking good. Ooh, a bit twitchy. You can see our speckles are speckling. They're a little bit small at the moment. That's because it is a very small screen, so it's slightly pixelated, as you can tell from the edge. Not to worry, but you can see from all these flowing bits and things, if it stops glitching for a moment. Yeah, that's looking rather nice, and our atmospheric effect is flowing. Well, I think we have a rather nice sun there, so So all that remains for us to do is to add in the actual flaming halo, which we can do, he says cautiously. Yeah, we've been having a lot of trouble with that, which is why one of the reasons I'm doing it as a separate tutorial. So look out for that. You could pretty much get away with this if you were just having a background. It's pretty cool on its own. But yeah, we can do better. We can get the corona working nicely. So yeah, with that in mind, let's end this video here, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next part, and leave a comment in the comment section. Let us know what you think, and hit us up on Twitter and Facebook and all those good things. They'll be down in the description. We'll see how much more impressive your renders are going to be. Well, thank you very much, and we'll see you again. Bye for now.